Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning. This is Victoria Ellenbogen, and I'm here helping moderate this webinar. Today's webinar training is going to be on the Assistance for Small and Disadvantaged Communities Drinking Water Grant. And today we have Alyssa Edwards here. She's the lead for this grant, and she's going to be talking about a few important details. So I hope that everyone finds this helpful. The right side of your screen should have a panel where you can ask Q&A. There is a box for you to ask questions, and so we will have some time at the end of today's webinar to go through them. Please feel free to send questions in throughout the presentation. Don't feel you need to wait till the end, and we'll have time to answer those. So thanks so much, and Alyssa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Victoria. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Alyssa Edwards, and I am our headquarters lead on the Assistance for Small and Disadvantaged Communities Drinking Water Grant. This is our third informational webinar for states. So for some of our states that are listening in right now, some of this information will be a repeat of what you've heard on the previous webinars. However, this is our first webinar since the release of the implementation document. So there is some updated information here. And also just wanted to let everybody know that we will be sending out the slides from this webinar after we finish up with the webinar, so rest assured that you will be getting those slides. Okay, so the purpose of the webinar today, we'll be going through an overview of the grant program, talking about the statutory authority around the grant. We'll cover the eligibilities. We'll also talk about the ineligible activities in terms of the grant funding related to this program. We'll also cover the allocation of funds, the cost-sharing requirements. There are a number of cost-sharing requirements related to this grant program. We'll cover some of your frequently asked questions, and then we'll make sure that everybody has the appropriate contact information for following up with your regional points of contact. Okay, a brief overview. So this grant program is authorized under Section 1459A of the Safe Drinking Water Act. This section of the Safe Drinking Water Act was amended by the 2016 Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act and the 2018 America's Water Infrastructure Act. And what this section does is it authorizes the EPA to award grants to states to assist underserved, small and disadvantaged communities that are unable to finance activities needed to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act, as well as it adds on a provision where states can use this funding to respond to a drinking water contaminant concern. The grant includes approximately $42.8 million in funding for 2019. So again, in terms of this grant program and what is authorized, so EPA is going to be awarding grants to states via the statute. That is required in the statute that if EPA is awarding grants to states, that is going to be on behalf of states' underserved communities. And the statute is specific in terms of how an underserved community is defined. An underserved community is defined in the statute as a political subdivision of a state that either A, does not have household drinking water or wastewater services, or B, is served by a public water system that violates or exceeds, as applicable, a requirement of a national primary drinking water regulation issued under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that includes a maximum containment level, a treatment technique, and an action level. The term small and disadvantaged is also defined in the statute as a community that A, either under affordability criteria established by the state, is determined by the state to be a disadvantaged community or to be a community that may become a disadvantaged community as a result of carrying out a project or activity under this grant program, or B, has a population of less than 10,000 individuals that the administrator determines does not have the capacity to incur debt sufficient to finance a project or activity under this grant program. And we want to make sure that states are aware that EPA is going to defer to all of you, deferring to the states to identify which of your small communities lack the capacity to incur debt to finance a project and which of these small communities can most benefit from this funding opportunity. The eligible applicants. So EPA is awarding funds non-competitively to states, and that includes the 50 states, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Northern Mariana Islands. And there is the implementation document, as I mentioned, for states has been released, and that is available online at epa.gov/safewater/grants. So that is was released just this last month in September. So we really do encourage you to take a look at that implementation document for the full details about the grant program. The allocation of funds, EPA is awarding funds to states based on a formula similar to that of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. The national allotments for this grant are also available on the website. And I'm not sure if I mentioned already, but there is a tribal allotment for this grant program. So approximately 2% is set aside as a tribal allotment. This tribal allotment is calculated according to the Drinking Water Infrastructure Grant Tribal Set-Aside Formula. Eligible activities under this grant program include investments necessary for a public water system to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act, efforts that benefit a disadvantaged community on a per household basis, programs to provide household water quality testing, including testing for unregulated contaminants. We know unregulated contaminants are a very big concern for a number of the states, so funding can be used to provide household water quality testing, including for the testing of unregulated contaminants. And also, too, funding can be used for activities necessary and appropriate for a state to respond to a contaminant. So some of those additional details about those activities are provided here, and the grant funding can be used for activities that may include treatment, transmission and distribution, storage, consolidation, household water quality testing, as was mentioned previously, including for unregulated contaminants. It can also be used to assist water systems to increase their technical, managerial, and financial capacity, and then also too for efforts related to responding to a drinking water contaminant. Again, more details are provided in the implementation document that's been released and is now available online. So some examples, further examples of projects and activities under those categories. So for treatment, some example activities that can be funded through the grant program include construction of new facilities or portions of facilities, upgrades, rehabilitation, or replacement of facilities or portions of facilities, raw water storage that is part of the treatment process and located on the property where the treatment facility is located, point of access or point of use treatment devices, for example, filters, are only eligible if the device is the compliance treatment technology and the device is owned and maintained by the public water system. Some examples of activities that can be funded for transmission and distribution include installation, replacement, or rehabilitation of infrastructure to improve water pressure to safe levels or to prevent contamination caused by non-potable liquids entering the system through leaks or pipe breaks, service line replacements regardless of pipe material and ownership of the property on which the service line is located. The service line can be replaced up to premise plumbing. And we just want to make sure that states, all of you are aware that partial replacement of lead service lines is not eligible under this grant program. Also, too, new water main extensions to serve existing residents not served by a safe supply of potable water is eligible under this grant program, and this includes the installation of the service line up to premise plumbing as well. Some example activities that can be funded through this grant program for storage include new storage or replacement or rehabilitation of existing structures to continue to maintain compliance and protect public health by preventing contaminants from entering a water system, equalizing water demands, reducing pressure in the system, providing reserves when power outages and other emergencies occur, and providing for drought resiliency. Some example activities under the category of consolidation include the purchase of a water system, interconnection of systems, for instance, to resolve Safe Drinking Water Act noncompliance, to achieve the technical, managerial, and financial capacity needed to prevent noncompliance, to reduce the overall per household cost of service, also for resiliency. And we want to make sure that everyone's aware that per the statute, so this is written into the statute, that funding from the grant program cannot be used to purchase land, easements, rights of way, or relocations. That is all prohibited by the statute in terms of the use of the funding for this grant program. Also, too, consolidation activities cannot be for growth purposes, but we will consider deviations for water systems in small and disadvantaged communities to consolidate with existing systems that have the adequate TMF capacity. Some example activities around the category of household water quality testing include testing for unregulated contaminants, as was mentioned earlier, conducting initial, special, non-routine monitoring to establish a baseline understanding of a contaminant of concern or operation of newly used technology, testing for potential contamination in drinking water wells or home systems, testing and analysis of household water through a compliance lab, testing to help identify and improve conditions that may trigger drinking water well pollution. And also, too, we want to make sure to note that funding from the grant program cannot be used for maintenance and operation purposes. That's prohibited by statute, or for routine compliance monitoring and sampling. And then our largest category of example eligible activities and projects is under the category of technical, managerial, and financial capacity. So there are a range of activities that can be funded under this category through the grant program. That includes everything from training for staff, identification and inventory of lead service lines, water and energy audits, completion of environmental reviews, developing cost estimates for project planning, financial assistance for planning and design of infrastructure improvements, asset management, and again, identification and inventory of service lines, including those lead service lines. Some examples of potential activities and projects that can be funded for a state to respond to a drinking water contaminant are investigation of a suspected water contamination incident to determine the extent of the contamination, planning activities for remediation, contaminant characterization, decontamination, and clearance activities to return a public water system to normal operation, risk communication, public notification activities, and then post-remediation monitoring to verify the removal of a contaminant. Ineligible activities. So there are some activities that are ineligible either by statute or by policy or by the electronic code of federal regulations in terms of the use of grant funding. So again, to reiterate that the purchase of land, easements, rights of way, and relocations are prohibited by statute. Also prohibited by statute is the use of funding under this grant program for operations and maintenance costs. Also ineligible is partial lead service line replacement, construction or rehabilitation of dams, purchase of water rights, construction or rehabilitation of reservoirs, activities needed primarily for fire protection, activities needed primarily to serve future population growth, activities that have received assistance from the tribal allotment under the same grant program, and then also costs that are unallowable under the Code of Federal Regulations. So these are some of the ineligible activities, and we'd like you all just to keep these in mind as you're developing your work plans. So there are cost share requirements under this grant program. So by the statute, the first cost share requirement is that the entity, in this case, this is the states, because EPA is awarding funding to states on behalf of your underserved communities. So there is a cost share, and that is to pay not less than 45% of the total cost of the project or activity, which may include services, materials, supplies, or other in-kind contributions. So again, I want to reiterate that it's 45% of the total cost of the project or activity. So I know that some of the states, you all have your SRF programs that are going to be managing this grant program. Note that this is different than how the cost share is calculated for your SRF program. So this is 45% of the total cost of the project or activity. Also, too, by the statute, the other cost share requirements include the provision of any land, easements, rights of way, and relocations necessary to carry out the project or activity, and also, too, to pay 100% of any operation and maintenance costs associated with the project or activity. Okay, in terms of the cost share. So states, you can use your own funds or other sources to meet that 45% cost share as long as the standards around cost shares are being met. The non-federal cost share, again, can be provided from in-kind contributions. That could be such as the use of volunteers, donated time or equipment. Your cost share contributions are subject to the regulations governing matching fund requirements. In-kind contributions can also include salaries or other verifiable costs. And the cost share must be used for eligible and allowable project costs and must be used in a way that it's necessary and reasonable expenses for carrying out the work under your work plan. So other federal grants may not be used as cost share without specific statutory authority to do so. And there is the full set from the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations regarding cost share. There's the link provided there. And again, we'll be sending out these webinar slides to all of you following the webinar. So you'll have that link so you can look into further information about the federal regulations around cost share requirements. Okay, so for your activities and your project selection process, now that we have the implementation document out, we've had a number of you follow up with your regional staff and also inquire here with headquarters about some of the details of the grant program. We'd like to really encourage all of the states to begin your process as early as possible to try and identify activities and projects for the grant award. The process that will be used is that you all will be submitting your draft work plans and your activity and project list to your respective EPA regions. So we really are encouraging you all to get those draft work plans together, start dialoguing with your regions, so that way your regions can make sure that your final work plans are actually meeting all the objectives of the grant program and are abiding by the requirements of the statute. So your final work plans, we're going to be looking to see, or your EPA regional staff are going to be reviewing these work plans to see. The work plans are actually designed to help achieve the goals and objectives of the grant program, that all the costs that are included are eligible and reasonable and necessary, allowable and consistent with the grant, that there are clearly identified outcomes and outputs and other results that are linked to the funding that you're going to have access to, and that there's also target dates and milestones for achieving the goals and the outputs and the outcomes that you put into your work plan. And also, too, in the work plan, we need to see a clear identification of the source of that non-federal cost share that is, again, 45% of the total project cost. So those are all the factors that your EPA regional staff will be looking at as they're reviewing your work plans. So some of the key work plan elements, this is also provided in the implementation document in the appendix of the implementation document, so don't feel like you have to take notes on all of this. Again, this presentation or this webinar is a condensed summary of the information that you'll find in the implementation document. But in your work plans, we are looking to see that there is an overall summary of your projects and your approach, and that would include your activities, so a description of the activities to be funded, including a discussion of how the activities are either necessary for a public water system to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act, and or provides household water quality testing, and or is necessary for a state to respond to a contaminant. So again, those are the key areas that this the statute for this grant program authorizes. The activities in the work plans, they must fund projects and activities that benefit underserved communities. So EPA is awarding funding to states on behalf of your underserved communities. So again, we need to see in your work plans that actually that underserved community criteria is being met. And we're hoping that you'll also look into identifying projects and activities in these underserved communities, those communities that actually have the greatest needs. So we also are looking for in your work plans that you'll identify the roles and responsibilities of the state and any of your project partners, contractors, sub-grantees, sub-awardees, or sub-recipients. We'll also be looking for a timeline and milestones. So the timeline should have not only the activities you've selected for funding, but when those activities will be done, the milestones for achieving those activities for each specific task. Also, this is a requirement for work plans on EPA grants overall, is that we're looking to see the connection between the strategic plan for EPA strategic plan, so what the programmatic priorities are connected to EPA's FY 2018 through 2022 strategic plan, and we do have that plan goal available for you, and that's also in the implementation document in the appendix. Also, too, we'll want to see your environmental results, your outputs, and your outcomes. So these should be clear in your work plan. And then also, we'll want to see a budget narrative. So the important thing with this budget narrative is that, yes, we're getting a description of your budget and the estimated funding amount, but also, too, we're going to need to make sure that that 45% cost share is being met. And so we'll want to see a description of how that 45% cost share is going to be obtained and how it's going to be used. And if that cost share is going to be provided by a third party, then we'll want to see a letter of commitment in terms of your work plan to make sure that your third party has also agreed to provide a portion or all of that cost share. Okay, some of the responses to our frequently asked questions that we've been getting about the grant program. We have been asked if this grant is actually going to be awarded as a grant and not principal forgiveness. And yes, this grant, it is a grant, so it is not the same as what you may see under the SRF. So this is going to be awarded as grants and not principal forgiveness. There is no administrative set aside for this grant program, and the grant program will follow the administrative requirements as outlined in the Office of Management and Budget's Uniform Grant Guidance. And again, this link here goes into some of those administrative requirements, and you all will have access to this link from the webinar slides when we send them out following the webinar. We've also been asked about Davis-Bacon or American Iron and Steel requirements, and Davis-Bacon and American Iron and Steel requirements do not apply to this grant program. However, NEPA does apply to this program, and some of your projects and activities, depending upon what is proposed, we may need to look at doing environmental reviews. So just keep that in mind that NEPA does apply to the activities and projects funded under this grant program. We've also been asked if activities and projects can be ones already on lists developed by the state through your DWSRF intended use plan process. And yes, you can piggyback off of your already existing intended use plan to identify your activities and projects, as long as all of the statutory requirements of the grant are being met. So again, a reminder, you'll want to make sure that the communities that you're looking at funding projects in, they're underserved communities, and that also too, they are either small or disadvantaged, all according to the statute. Some other questions we've been getting have been about quality assurance project plans. So quality assurance project plans will be required for activities that involve the collection of environmental data. This will be significant for the projects that are looking at household water quality testing. So for any states looking to use these funds for household water quality testing, there will need to be a quality assurance project plan in place. Also, too, we've been asked about can DWSRF funds be used for that 45% cost share? And the answer is that no DWSRF funds will be considered for cost share for this grant program. So again, no DWSRF funds are considered as cost share for this grant program. That includes federal capitalization grants, state match, principal repayments, interest earnings, fees, or leverage funds. However, remember that the cost share can be met through state services, materials, supplies, or other in-kind contributions. Also, too, I mentioned about the use of other federal funds for meeting cost share. So in general, federal funds from one grant, from one agency, cannot be used to meet a statutory cost share requirement on another federal grant from any agency unless, this is the big caveat here, unless there is specific statutory authority that provides otherwise. So there are federal grants that do actually have that statutory authority that allows them to be used to meet cost share on other federal grants. And one example is the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Community Development Block Grant. So for that specific grant, their statute does allow it, does give it the statutory authority to be used as federal funds for a cost share on another grant. So for this grant program, HUD's Community Development Block Grant funds will be allowable to meet towards the 45% cost share. And then we have been asked who is required to provide that 45% cost share. So we just want to point out that states are the receiving entity of these grants from EPA. So states are the entities required to provide the 45% cost share. However, you may actually ask your sub-grantees or your sub-awardees to provide some form of cost share, but we just want you to keep in mind that the communities receiving the assistance, the purpose of this grant is to assist those communities that have limited financial capacity. So that may be very difficult for a sub-grantee or a sub-awardee to come up with any cost share. Also, too, just a reminder that the non-federal cost share, it can be provided as in-kind services, resources, as cash, as the use of volunteers or donated time. So we hope that you'll look into all those options for meeting that cost share requirement. We've also been asked about state general obligation bond funds. So those state general obligation bond funds are a valid source of the cost share for this grant program, but that is provided that the use of the funds in this way is legal under state law, and that the funds are specifically going to projects or activities under this grant. They're not being used to fulfill any other cost share requirements, and that these funds adhere to the regulations governing matching fund requirements, according to the Code of Federal Regulations. Also, too, non-federal public water system supervision overmatch will count towards the cost share. Again, this is provided, that same caveat as before, provided that this is legal under state law, and again, that the funds are going to projects and activities under this grant program. They're not being used to fulfill any other cost share requirements, and that the Code of Federal Regulations is also being adhered to. So the next steps, as I mentioned, that in September, our implementation document was released. We also had applications open on grants.gov in September. And we want to make sure that you all are aware that there is an extended application window. We recognize that it may take some time to come up with that 45% cost share requirement of total project costs and activities. And so with that in mind, the application is going to be open for approximately a year. Applications are not going to close until September 30th of next year, so September 30th of 2020. And we hope that your next steps will be that you're going to work with your EPA regional staff on your draft work plans. You'll be discussing with them about your proposed projects and activities and identifying the communities that are best suited to benefit from this grant program funding. Again, funding will be awarded on a rolling basis as applications are submitted, and your EPA regional offices, they're going to be your primary points of contact on not only looking at your work plans, but also in approving your grant applications, and they're going to be the ones who are going to be awarding the funding. So we do have more information that's available online. Your go-to spot, other than your EPA regional point of contact, just for basic background information about the grant program, for looking at the implementation document, you'll want to go to the website, which is epa.gov/safewater/grants. And again, on the website, you'll find any future webinar announcements. You'll find your EPA regional contacts by state and territory. We also have a listing of the state and territory agency contacts available online. We have that state implementation document, as I mentioned. We have additional frequently asked questions, and we also have the grant program fact sheet and other materials. Also, that's where you'll be able to find, once we have it available, the tribal implementation document as well. So again, I mentioned your first points of contact are going to be your EPA regional contacts. And the slide that you see here, these are your EPA regional contacts by state and territory. So I'm going to leave this open for you all to make a note of. This is also available on our website. But that is coming to the end of the general overview about the grant program. And we're just going to take a brief pause while we look at some of your questions. And then we're going to answer some of the questions that we've been receiving through the Q&A box. Yes, so these slides will be sent out, so you will be receiving, as long as you registered for the webinar, you will be receiving these slides. So if you're in a room where there's one person who registered and there's a group of you in that room, whoever registered is going to be the one to receive the slides from today's webinar. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either your EPA regional point of contact as your first point of contact, or you can also contact us here at headquarters. And on the slide you're seeing now, you can see that last link there. That is the email address to contact us directly here at headquarters. And also pay attention to our website for any future webinar announcements or any updates as we are rolling out this grant program. So thank you all for your time today, and thank you for your questions, and we look forward to seeing your work plans. Your regions look forward to working with you on your work plans and reviewing them, and getting some of these projects and activities funded and underway. So thank you all.